Today's piece, The Four Periods of the Black Movement in Brazil and Their Conquest, is a piece by Camila Guimarães. So since the movement is any and all acts of effects of moving oneself, it is necessary to think of all of those who prefer death to slavery, considering that Black people have always been in the movement, the Black movement. But it was in 1888 that Blacks ceased to be the property of the señor, meaning master, becoming the responsibility of the state. And what did it do for this population? Well, in 1837, its first education law said that Blacks can't go to school. In 1850, the Lei de Terras, the land law, prohibited Blacks from owning any land. In 1871 was the Lei do Ventre Livre. This law granted freedom to all children born of slaves and signaled the eventual end of slavery. The Lei do Sexagenário, with this law granted freedom to all slaves over the age of 60. And then what's this? The Golden Law was officially abolished slavery throughout all of Brazil. Now, 1888 was 25 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in the United States. Then you have what's called the Lei dos Vadios e Capoeiras in 1890. This prohibited the practice of the capoeira martial art all over Brazil. Under this law, anyone practicing capoeira could be placed under arrest, tortured, and even mutilated by police. So again, Brazil likes to present itself as this racial democracy. We don't treat Black people like that. But when you start really getting into the history, you see there's quite a bit of violence that's been enacted against Black Brazilians. I have yet to even get into the shocking numbers of how many persons of African descent get murdered by the police in Brazil every year. It will blow your mind. Now, to deal with the conquest of the Black moment in a chronological way becomes extremely complex because we must analyze and take into account all historical events since Africa. In honor of the ancestors, a starting point is needed. So the recognition of the Movimento Negro as a political actor is a movement that builds, systematizes, and articulates knowledge produced by the Black population throughout Brazilian social, political, cultural, and educational history. The Black movement is composed of several characters who use various strategies of conquest. In his proposal, Professor Petronio Domingues traces a historical panorama of the performance of the Black movement in three moments. The first being 1889 to 1937. The second being 1945 to 1964. The third being 1978 to 2000. And then you have 2000 to the current time. This guy, Petronio Domingues, really important work that this guy has been doing. I have a couple of his books. I'm not sure if I discovered this particular topic from his work or from an American source. I can't remember, but he did some incredible work exposing how, I think it was in the 1930s, there were a group of African Americans who were trying to migrate to Brazil because Brazil was trying to attract foreigners to come and populate the country. But when the Brazilian government found out that the people that were coming there who were coming to Brazil to, inhabit some of the lands were actually Black Americans, they promptly shut down their request for visas. That's an intriguing story. That's one I have to get into very soon, with this this interest that a lot of African American men have in coming to Brazil these days. Anyway, the first period of the Black movement. In the first period, the Black movement has a moderate discourse with a culture strategy of assimilationist inclusion, with ideological principles and political positions focused on nationalism and defense of right-wing political forces. In this period, Blacks had no land rights, no trade. They were left to their own devices without moral and educational preparation, causing the marginalization of the population. I believe this guy's name is Arlindo, forget his middle name, Arlindo dos Santos, I'll say. And then you have José Correia Leite. These were two prominent members of the Frente Negra Brasileira, one of the first Black political party in Brazil, and one of its most important, one of the first, let's say, Black organizations that fought for the rights of Black Brazilians, okay? The movement of this era is characterized by a focus on literacy, the creation of Black groups, especially the Centro Cívico de Palmares, meaning the Palmares Civic Center of 1926, An association is based on the culture of assimilation of clubs existing at the time, as well as the circulation of information based on the structuring of networks. We can highlight the newspapers A Pátria of 1899, O Combate of 1912, and Clarim do Alvorada in 1924. During this period, we have records of the existence of at least 31 articles circulating in Sao Paulo. So some well-known early versions of Black media back in those days, the Voz da Raça, which means voice of the race, O Clarim do Alvorada, e O Menelik. There's actually a group now who've taken over. It's not the same magazine, but they're using that same name, O Menelik, very popular website that they have, doing a lot of historic research on the situation of Black Brazilians. The highlight of this period runs in 1931 with the foundation of the Frente Negra Brasileira, meaning the Brazilian Black Front, with representation at the state level, being able to attract thousands of Blacks, organize the group, maintain schools, theater groups, political and craft formation, and the newspaper A Voz da Raça, which was extinguished in 1937 along with the Frente Negra, with the establishment of what's called the new state, o Novo Estado in Brazil. It was the first of two dictatorships in the 20th century, which effectively shut down all other political organizations in the country. So this is a picture of the Frente Negra Brasileira, or just some of its members. As the membership reached into the thousands, and most based in Sao Paulo. Throughout the construction of the Brazilian state, we had mechanisms that produce social inequalities, with the idea of race as a mobilizing axis of social relations, reflecting the color of inclusion to this day. For equalities are not natural, but a historical production, one of the attributions of the Black movement being the struggle within a process of resocialization. The second period of the Black movement. The second period from 1945 to 1964 maintains the moderate discourse with a strategy of culture and integration, stating that the solution to racism will be through education and culture, focusing on raising the self-esteem of Blacks, eliminating the inferiority complex, and the racial re-education of the white man, or just white people in general. This is a picture of this is Abdias do Nascimento, one of the guy who founded the TEN, basically is the Black Experimental. What is it? The Black Experimental Theater, which was 10 in Portuguese, Teatro Experimental do Negro, it was called. And I think he started this theater group back in 1944. Organized a lot of plays. Abdias do Nascimento is considered one of the most important Black intellectuals of the 20th century, according to the Africana Encyclopedia. So during this period, methods such as the press, academic events, avant-garde artistic movements were used, denouncing the myth of racial democracy, highlighting the Teatro Experimento do Negro, meaning the Black Experimental Theater, the União dos Homens do de Cor, which means the Union of Men of Color, with José Bernardo da Silva and Abdias do Nascimento as its main leaders. This is just a flyer, a journal, or just a news piece coming out of the União dos Homens de Cor, again, the Union of Men of Color. Note the full name of Brazil back in those times was actually Estados Unidos do Brasil, which is the United States of Brazil. If one of these days I have to show you what the flag looked like, because even the flag that Brazil was using at the time was copied after the United States. If you look at it, they just, from red, white, and blue, they just changed it to the Brazilian colors of blue, green, and white. I'm not sure if there was yellow there, but it was once called the United States of Brazil, right? The third period of the Black movement, as a social movement, the seeds planted in the first and second periods flourished in the third period, this being a strong period with different strategies with the search for equality and difference, with an international context focused on Afrocentrism, as well as the influence of the civil rights movement in the United States. In the normative field, we have the 1968 Lei do Boi, which created, this is a law that was passed in 68, which created a reserve of placement in high school, technical schools, and colleges maintained by the union in agronomy and medicine courses. In 1988, our current constitution was born, and in 2001, Several Afro-Brazilian activists participated in the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance held in Durban, South Africa in 2001. This conference ended just a little bit before September 11th, if I'm not mistaken. I think it went into like September 7th or something. There was also the official adoption of the term negro, what Americans would say Negro, but in Portuguese it's pronounced negro, and removing pessoa de cor, or person of color, and later the inclusion of the term Afrodescendente, or African descendant. The movement of this period sees slavery and the capitalist system as the marginalization of Black people. Their leaders emphasized that the way to reduce racism would be through the political route, a position raised in 1931. As a method of fighting public demonstrations, there is the formation of a grassroots committee, the formation of a national movement. Now, what they're saying, leaders emphasize that the way to reduce racism will be through the political route. I have my doubts about that, obviously, dealing with, the so-called help that we've gotten from the American government. So if they're emulating things that have happened in the United States, what do we really think that the results are going to be the same or any different? I would ask. Okay, how Ileaye brought Blackness back to Carnival. Okay, so these are just some women participating in the bloco that I mentioned earlier. Ileaye, very important group. They were formed in order to bring Blackness to Salvador's Carnival because, believe it or not, this is a city that's considered one of the blackest cities in Brazil, but yet they were excluded from Carnival, right? A lot to talk about when it comes to Ileaye. With emphasis on the Movimento Negro Unificado, or the Unified Black Movement, the Bloco Afro, Ileaye, and the reorganization of Black entities, such as the first national meeting of Black women in the city of Valença, Rio de Janeiro. So this is one of the banners for that particular, I would say, seminar or gathering of the first national meeting of Black women. So this was celebrated for 30 years from 1988 to 2018. There was also the extinction of the May 13th celebration and the explosion of the Black Soul movement. Now, to talk a little bit about that, slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888 on May 13th. And so for years, that was a day that the nation recognized when slavery came to an end. But what Black Brazilian activists did, starting from like 70 or 71, they rejected the May 13th celebration because they felt that it was only a half celebration. Like, Black Brazilians still aren't free to this day, even though they're not officially in slavery. They changed the date that Black Brazilians should celebrate to November 20th as the Day of Black Consciousness, which is celebrated now. Then they talk about the Black Soul movement. I spoke a little bit about this earlier with Filó and Carlos Medeiros. This is when thousands of Afro-Brazilian youth in various major cities throughout the country were going to these dances and dancing to Black American soul and funk music. There's some great documentaries, books, and dissertations about this movement. It's one of my favorite periods. I love to this particular piece of Black history in Brazil is phenomenal. It's there's like I said, I'm gonna have to talk more about this in the future, but it's just when you see that, it was like Black Brazilians coming together to dance to this music that was coming from the United States. And it helped to instill this pride of Blackness at the time that Brazil did not want people to have. The propaganda in Brazil says we're all just Brazilians. Why are you trying to import this racialized separation that's coming from the United States, when in fact Brazil has always treated its non-white population as second-class citizens? So you don't have to turn to the United States for segregation, because this is how Black Brazilians have always been treated. So when they come together to reiterate their identity, to identify with Blackness and the Blackness coming from people in the United States, then there's a problem. Anyway, the Black press returned with emphasis on the newspapers Simba from 1977, Nzinga 1984, and Revista Ébano in 1986. Is the ideological principle is political positions established in the intentionalism and defense of left-wing political forces between 1970 and 1980. So this was a magazine that came out, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s. It's called Ébano. I'll give you one guess what what magazine this might have been modeled from the United States. Anybody want to take a guess? It looks like this is from the first year. It was released in Sao Paulo. Looks like December of 1980. Again, Revista Ebeno. Okay. Okay, again, May 13th, False Abolition, Inequality, and Contemporary Slave Labor in Brazil. It discusses the myth of racial democracy as the minimum program of the United Black Movement against racial discrimination. We have the unity of the movement that aims at the implementation of a true social democracy according to the discourse of the powers. They bring the appreciation of the symbols associated with Black culture, bringing a discourse against miscegenation. There is an expansion of the space for discussion of the racial issue in the Chamber of Deputies, which is Brazil's House of Representatives. The main events of this period are the recognition of racism as a crime, the constitution of quotas, the insertion of the discipline of the history of Africa, demarcation of quilombos, and the commemoration of the November 20th, as I just mentioned. We highlight the names of Lelia Gonzalez and Hamilton Cardoso, already spoken about Leila Gonzalez, one of the most important Black anthropologists of the time in the 80s and the 90s, Black activist, important feminist. And Hamilton Cardoso, one of the founders of the Movimento Negro in the 1970s. With the struggle of these men and women that future generations enjoy the advances achieved and continue in the search for gender and race equity. So it brings us up to the fourth and last period, which is, what's going on now. The fourth period takes place from 2010 onwards with blunt, equitable discourses with ideological principles based on the Pan-Africanist, with intersectional approaches to confront the systematic dispensation of racial issues, fighting for agendas, and legitimizing Black leaders in all segments. Presenting a process of organization defined with Black women and men, young Black people, white people, this multiplicity of actors brings the responsibility of the search for the recognition of this diversity together with self-identification. Prominent names from this current period are mostly women, such as Sueli Carneiro, philosopher. She was one of the founders of the Guedes Black Women's Institute in 1988. Djamila Ribeiro, another prominent philosopher and feminist, well known throughout Brazil. Conceição Evaristo, she's a very popular Afro-Brazilian writer. And Nilma Lino Gomes, she's an important anthropologist, educator, and I think she became the first Black woman to be like the dean or the head of a public university in Brazil. She wrote a very important book in the, I believe, the early 2000s, and it was just about Black identity and the connection with natural Black hair. So the Black movement is necessary and ongoing since equity is not achieved by having one, but with multiplicity, perfecting democracy more and more. So just a brief overview of the four phases of what you could consider Black rights organizations in Brazil. We often look and believe like, well, Black Brazilians have never had, organization to fight against a system of oppression, but they have indeed for, over a century. This is just a short overview of the four phases of the Black rights organizations and movements. There's so much more that could be said about this, but I just wanted to introduce this topic because understanding what's going on with Black Brazilians today, you have to understand the Black movement. Like I said, a number of changes and positive changes and improvements that have been happening, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, go directly back to the activism of the Black movement. So anyway, hoping that you like this piece. I'm going to continue with more videos. And if you like these videos, I definitely want to request that you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this video to just, open up a conversation, a dialogue. I'm really appreciating the comments that people are leaving. And definitely click on the notification button so that you'll, get my videos as I post them. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and invite you all to come out and check out my next video. So until next time.